Where do the reports come from? Did you get an initial?
Whoa. Stop the music. Just want to jump in here, everybody. Hey, it's PodVader. Just want to let you all know this was recorded a little while ago before a lot of these opt-outs were occurring. And so I just want to give a quick little update on the whole opt-out situation. We don't really go into it in this particular podcast. We do discuss a little bit about the concept of opting out and how that might affect teams, but ultimately really don't get into it. And honestly, I think based on the number of players who have opted out and the quality of the players that have opted out, it doesn't really change much of what we discuss in this particular podcast. Remember, this is a preseason, postseason prediction show. It's not really going to affect a lot of our postseason discussions. However, if it does anything, I think it actually strengthens some of the arguments we're going to have about certain teams. One in particular, that being the team with the most opted out players, the New England Patriots. The Patriots end up losing at least 4 starters. And if you want to count Matt LaCosse as the quote unquote incumbent starter, that would be 5. So the Patriots actually have an interesting situation, especially on the defensive side of the ball, that I think changes the conversation a little bit. But as you're going to find out, listening to this particular podcast doesn't necessarily change the outcome of how I see the New England Patriots season playing out. So give it all a listen. We'll talk about the opt-outs probably in a later episode, and a little bit more about how it affects teams from a salary cap stance, although there's more news coming out that there might be some changes from a financial standpoint for teams and salary cap that becomes open, and obviously some free agents that are available that can help some teams that now have giant salary cap situations. There's a lot going on right now. Everything right now in the NFL is really fluid, which makes it very difficult to record a show like this in advance. But we did, and so we present it to you now without any more interruptions from me. Enjoy.
This,
No question about it.
is Next Fan Up.
We're going to unleash hell here in December.
Alrighty, welcome to the preseason, postseason prediction show. Hopefully you've listened to every one of Next Fan Up's wonderful preseason prediction podcasts. If you haven't, all 8 divisions have been previewed for you for your listening pleasure, and you can get those anywhere great podcasts are heard, like Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora. We know you love us on Pandora, so go check us out. Wherever you're listening to this podcast now, we've got a whole back catalog. You can check out any of our episodes. This is our preseason, postseason prediction show. What I mean by that is, as you know, having listened to all the previews, I've gone through and I've done my game-by-game predictions. Based on those records, I have seeded the playoffs and have predicted the playoffs and thus the eventual Super Bowl champion. To assist me in this task, we have a few superfans with us. As always, I have our Eagles superfan, James. Hello, James.
Hey, Pod. After those 8 podcasts of grueling through mindless dribble with you and your wacky predictions, I'm still over here crying about Justin Jefferson because while this may debut later, today is the day that he officially signed with the Vikings. So I'm still crying over spilled milk.
We have his smugness himself, the superfan for the Chiefs. It's Nick. Hello, Nick.
How's it going? By the way, this just in. Chiefs will be undefeated in the preseason.
Along with 31 other teams.
And if I have Nick, I need someone to sort of balance the force, if you will. It is our Raiders superfan, Monty. Hello, Monty.
Hello, everyone. I just wanted to point out that if you're enjoying 2020 and the way things are going, that's what happens when the Chiefs win a Super Bowl. So I'm kind of reaching out to everyone listening. Please implore your team to do what it can to prevent this from ever happening again.
What if so what you're saying is you would rather have the evil empire of the Patriots win a Super Bowl than the Chiefs winning the Super Bowl. I like that.
Never again.
The last time the Patriots won a Super Bowl, I wasn't locked in my house for 6 months at a time. So, I mean, I don't know if it's correlation or causation, but I can tell you that since the Chiefs have won the Super Bowl, my life has gotten much worse.
The numbers don't lie.
Speaking of getting much worse, there was a whole bunch of news that occurred as we had previously recorded all of our division previews, and then news occurred that changed some of the things that resulted in our predictions, including Cam Newton getting signed. The Chiefs apparently found some monopoly money and made some signings that don't seem to make a lot of sense based on actual accounting. But then again, accountants can make anything work. And the Washington team apparently, imploded. People also sent us emails. Gentlemen, this is, I'm always surprised when this happens. nextfanup@gmail.com. This is from Paul in New Zealand. Says, hi, Pod. Good to hear you in the podcast again. What's your feeling regarding the upcoming season? Are we kicking off on schedule? And if so, will there be any fans in the stadia? I do hope so. I've taken the day off work in anticipation. Kickoff happens at 5 a.m. on Monday the 14th here. Probably not a topic for mentioning on the pod at the moment, given the current divisional preview format. Well, Paul, this is the time to bring this up because we're going to talk about all of this in regards to how the season's coming up, plus those news stories that I mentioned there that occurred during our recording. I think the season's going to start on time. Whether it's going to finish on time, I think is the other question. We were talking right before we started recording. My whole problem with the way that the NFL has laid out how this season's going to go down, and we'll talk about how they plan on attacking the preseason. But my whole problem has been the logistics of it. I just don't understand how you think you can travel interstate at this period of time where the virus is raging in some places and Connecticut, the only state where everything's under control. But apparently that's just because we're the highway between Boston and New York. But, I mean, if you don't own your own transportation, I just don't understand how you can feel safe chartering a plane or a service of that sort. Nick, your team doesn't own their own transportation, right?
Nope, they fly charter, and and to me, it's even more about just the transportation. By the sounds of it, basically, every team's going to be sort of responsible for their own house, and that means that other teams are going to have to go into that house, once a week as well. And it reminds me of kind of the response of the country as a whole. It's going to be a bit of a patchwork. Granted, they have to have plans, like their plans for keeping everything clean and things like that. That has to be approved by the league. But fine. I mean, a plan on paper is just that. How things are going weeks into this, who knows? And it only takes, 1 week link, whether that is a team, a player. Honestly, it could just be one that then starts an outbreak, or on a team employee. And some of these organizations are not as well run as others. Some of them are pretty cheap. Some of them, skimp on these things, and you just don't know. I mean, even aside from the plane, you're getting off the plane and going into a locker room and a team facility of another team, and you just have to trust that they have their stuff together.
Monty, your team's moving to a brand new facility, and there's been lots of things happening there in Vegas. How many stadium workers died building the Vegas stadium, or was that just LA? I don't remember which one.
Well, I haven't heard any specific deaths. I can Google that while we're going through the show. I haven't heard anything that anyone died.
So it must be the LA stadium. There were a bunch of deaths in the LA stadium, but Vegas. From what I know, from what I've gathered, I think Vegas is moving forward. With limited capacity, but everything seems to be on track in Vegas.
Oh, those casinos are clean, aren't they? What could possibly go wrong?
Not sure that's ever been an adjective associated with them, but
oh gosh, yeah. Let's
James,
not go into Vegas and their representatives talking on CNN during the initial opening of states and cities.
Oh, come on. The mayor was brilliant, I thought.
Brilliantly idiotic, yes.
Some of the teams have announced that they're going to have limited capacity in the stands, nothing more than 25%. But New York specifically had to come out because of rules from New Jersey saying there will be no fans in the stands in New York.
Well, that's easy for New York because 2 of its 3 teams play in Jersey anyway.
Right. What about in Philly? Philly was going to have limited, and then they said, no, we can't have any. And then they said, yes, we can.
Still waffling back and forth, and I did hear both reports. Last I heard, it was limited fan capacity. So, from what I've seen here in Atlanta, reports came across that they're going to have 10 to 20,000 max in their stadium. I still don't understand how this is going to parse out because now you're telling certain season ticket holders that they can come and others that they can't. What are you doing? Reducing their packages to 4 games each? You know, that here are weeks that they can come, here are the weeks they can't come to home games. Same thing with Philadelphia and all the other cities that are in states that are allowing some type of large gatherings to take place in, quote, limited capacities, because I still don't understand how 10 to 20,000 people is a limited capacity. I mean, in the scope of a stadium seating almost 100+ thousand people, sure. But 10,000 or 20,000 people is still a lot of folks to be packed together when the CDC strongly suggests no gatherings of more than 10 people, 10, like after 9, before 11. But how this plays out, I think that and sometimes players thrive off the energy of the crowds. These players may have to learn how to do it without fans in the stands.
Monty replies that one person died building the Death Star, which,
at least,
by the way,
at least one.
I take offense to calling Allegiant Stadium the Death Star. I get it because it's black and whatever.
Nick has come up with another name I've seen on the internet that.
From the sky, it does look like a giant Roomba in the desert.
Oh, gosh.
Kind of does.
By the way, they will be sweeping the leg of any Kansas City Chiefs because this ever happened again.
The projected loss of having no fans in the stands is like $4 billion. And I've seen a lot of people saying, oh, well, the new TV deal is going to cover. The new TV deal is not covering $4 billion. And if it is, then we're paying way too much to watch television. And speaking of that, how in the world, Nick, did the Chiefs pull off the trick of signing Patrick Mahomes to a record-breaking NFL contract? Granted, it is over the course of 10 years. And Chris Jones.
And Matt Moore out of that minimum deal. No one talks about Matt Moore. Yeah, it is pretty crazy that a few months ago, the Chiefs literally had $177 in cap space at one point. They now have, I think, after the signing of their rookie class, they'll have like 1.5. And they've signed $600 million for the deals in the meantime. So we were kind of having this discussion in the Slack channel about whether or not the cap is fake, whether or not, any of that sort of stuff is real or not. And I mean, the cap absolutely does matter. I think what the difference is that if you really want a guy and if the guy really wants to stick around, you can work with it, especially for longer term deals. And that's what the Chiefs did. And really what set it all up was Mahomes is crazy, but honestly, way under market deal. He is, let me pull up his actual full numbers here. So, I mean, the eye-popping number is that it's basically with incentives, $500 million. Right. But that's, first of all, it's 10 years tacked on the end of his rookie deal where he's making still like $5 million this year. He's going to be making, $24 million next year, 31 in 2022. And in 2023, he is slated to become the league's highest paid player at $42.4 million. But even then, there's going to be 3 years of contract signed between now and then. It's very likely that throughout the entire length of this contract, he will never be the highest paid player in the NFL, despite, probably every year being arguably its best. And so doing that with backloading that deal, they gave them just enough space to squeeze in Chris Jones, who also, is also a fairly team-friendly deal. He's making over $20 million a year. But the way the guarantees work, it's sort of like, it's similar to deeper into the Mahomes deal, where if they cut you 1 year, they're they still have to pay you that year and the next year, no matter what. But beyond that, then that's where the pain ends, should there be some sort of a catastrophic injury or whatever. And so they actually still have a fair amount of flexibility, and they were clearly just trying to cram these two guys into this Super Bowl window right ahead of them. And I do actually think that despite, again, the eye-popping numbers, they're probably going to be relatively okay for weathering the storm of the next couple of years. In terms of the cap. Now, what we don't know is just how much that cap is going to be cut back and how big, how far they're going to spread the hit of whatever revenue losses they have this year. But the Chiefs have set the table for a pretty long Super Bowl window, about as well as you can do. And I think Brett Veach, Chiefs GM, does not get quite enough credit. I think most people don't even know what he looks like.
No, we don't. But we don't need to. I mean, I think ultimately the biggest, you're right. I mean, this sets the Chiefs up perfectly to, Chris Jones said, now it's time to start a dynasty, which everyone starts rolling their eyes. But at the same point, you have a kid who's already won a Super Bowl after his second year that most people are saying is the second coming of Tom Brady, if not better. And he's now signed for 12 years to the team. To me, it is the start of a new dynasty in the NFL. I don't see why we should just brush that off as you can't say it. It's so hard to do that in the NFL. I don't necessarily see it the same way. I do see that the Chiefs could go on a long run here. Not to curse you or anything.
So gross.
Well, I mean,
so gross.
The reality is that, it's not a super common thing, but nonetheless, basically every decade has had its dynasty. Like the 60s, I think it was like the Packers, 70s, it was the Steelers, 80s, it was the Niners, 90s, it was the Cowboys, and then the 2000s and 2010s was basically the Patriots with a short interruption or at least attempt at breaking in there by like the Seahawks. But that's, every decade has had them. And I don't like counting my chickens before they hatch. And it's just, it's something for us all to talk about during the off season. But, I do think you're kind of lying to yourself if you don't look at it like that. If there's any team that's got it set up, and look, paying big money to big guys, as long as they're elite players. The problem is when you pay giant contracts to mediocre players and then have to deal with that. But I don't really have any questions about whether or not Chris Jones and Patrick Mahomes are worth the money.
James, I'm on Over the Cap right now, and I know one of the teams that had cap problems going into the season were the Eagles. Now, all of a sudden, they're 6th in effective cap space with $22.5 million and $11.3 million in dead money. How the hell did you pull that off?
Willing and dealing like they always do. Credit to Howie Roseman. Look, some of those contracts, we were able to get rid of because we just moved players or restructured deals like we normally do. Veterans that we didn't have to re-sign, like bringing Jason Peters back at guard at basically the veteran minimum. Filling the voids of some of those players by bringing in rookies who pretty much won't command much money. Rieger and Hurts don't command much based on where they were drafted this past off season. So, look, Roseman and the front office do a good job of structuring these deals. Carson Wentz's contract, I don't think takes effect until I think it's the first year of his extension coming up. If not this year, then next year. So, and on defense, I think the biggest name player we're paying right now is Fletcher Cox, and the distant second is Brandon Graham. So there's not much high value money as far as players who are currently active. If you're looking at dead money, whatever we still owed Chris Long when he retired is now gone. And other players like that who have moved on or just were released when the season ended. So pretty much, just manipulating the cap.
Yes, I will say at overthecap.com, when you look at 2021 and still assuming that the cap goes up, even though I think we're all pretty sure it's going to go down, the Eagles are dead last at negative $54 million. So it does appear that the accounting just fixed it for this season, and they'll worry about next season when the time comes.
Next season. Mm-hmm.
Right. So, Monty, to you, I'm not going to ask you cap questions about the Raiders, but just the just sort of looking at the salary cap the way that it is and the way that we know that the economics of the league are going to be affected this particular season, there is no way in the world the salary cap can go up. And I know that's a problem that they are negotiating right now, is how do they effectively reduce salaries for the players, knowing that this season is going to be one, if it's not completed, it'll be shortened. And if it's not shortened, maybe they'll pause it. There's going to be all sorts of weird things that happen to this season.
Yeah, it feels like it's going to be week to week. I heard a story that, ideally the best case scenario is if it was flat year over year, which still causes a lot of problems for teams since most contracts increase year over year. So it's going to be a wild ride. Buckle up. Enjoy this preseason. Oh, we don't have enjoy this upcoming season, whatever it might be.
So let's talk about the preseason. And, my former colleague there, Mr. Ross Tucker, was talking about this, and the preseason training camps were supposed to start with 90. They've now renegotiated, and it's going to start with 80, which means right off the bat, before you even got on the field to prove yourself, 10 undrafted free agents, most likely, are getting cut right off the top from the roster. And Ross Tucker mentioned, if this upcoming preseason were to have happened when he was a rookie, there's no way in the world he'd ever have been an NFL player. It does seem to me that the players in their, we need to be safe, we need to rule on safety, have eliminated something that actually would give them a job, and that's preseason games. As much as we all hate the preseason games, there is a purpose to them. And while they don't need to have 4, I do think they need to have 1 or 2.
Yeah, and initially when it was scaled down from 4 to 2 because they were cutting weeks 1 and 4 to preseason, you felt that was probably the step in the right direction as far as, one, being, cautious with the entire situation of this pandemic that we're going through, and 2, still being able to evaluate talent. Look, I get that fans, by and large, in some general capacity, disdain the preseason because you're still paying for, quote, exhibition football. But you have to understand that this is where a lot of the guys who are brought in the off season doing OTAs, pretty much make their mark on, making squads. If we never had preseason, we would never had, a handful of Hall of Famers that we have right now, like Kurt Warner, off the top of my head. Victor Cruz would have never made the New York Giants because he was an undrafted free agent. So there's players of that ilk just who come in, and I'm not saying off the street, but just from lesser known schools to make a name for themselves. I'm blanking Denver Broncos running back from back in the day, Terrell Davis, made his mark preseason in a game that happened in Tokyo on special teams. That's how he made the roster at running
back. Philip Lindsay.
Philip Lindsay, just recently. So, you need this evaluation point. And while the veteran players don't like it, as well, because they don't like bruising their bodies for the regular season, even though they look like crap for the first 4 weeks of playing, quote, real football that counts. The coaches and the players at the end of the roster need this, because this is how these players make the squad. This is how the coaches evaluate talent and figure out what needs to be worked on. You can't go out there and run a pass play that you see, doesn't work against man or doesn't work against zone. You need to see how your schemes play out. And without that evaluation, there's only so much you can do in practice, against your own teammates, because coaches fall into ruts and certain mindsets of this is how we do it and this is how we're going to do it. So telling the scout team defense to run it a certain way because this is what you saw another team do in the past, that doesn't work. Look, an outlier this year, 3 of the 4 teams in the NFC East have new coaches. All the philosophies of Washington, New York, or Dallas are going to change. So the Eagles are going to see new schemes on both sides of the ball in these 6 games, should we have football this year, different than last year. So you need something on tape to say, okay, this is what we can look forward to when we go up against these teams. Now you don't have that, and you can't rely on last season.
And Monty, they're only going to have 8 padded practices, so they're not going to be practicing tackling. You're going up against your own team that's seen the same pass plays or run plays every single day in practice. To me, it just seems there's not going to be any way for a guy that's lower on the roster to really show that he's worthy of a roster spot. And also these guys are special teamers. And I've been to Patriots training camp for the last few years, and this will be the first year that I miss it with my son because of the way that the world is today. And they don't practice special teams. They do like 1 or 2 kickoffs during a session, and that's it.
I mean, it seems that the preseason and making a roster and some of these guys at the end of the roster, I mean, I totally agree with everything you guys are saying, but let's fast forward a little bit into the middle of the season. They're hell-bent on playing a season so they can get these TV dollars. What happens if some team, 16 people need to go on quarantine for 2 weeks because they get sick, and you don't have an expanded roster with people that are on the practice squad waiting to come in, and you're going to be signing Keanu Reeves and Scott Bakula off the street, trying to get them to go out and play a game against the Kansas City Chiefs. It seems like they're trying to save a little bit of money on those salaries, but then, long term, if something dramatic happens and they're not going to have enough quality players to put out on the field, it's an impossible task. 2020 is just, it's impossible, and it's definitely blaming the Kansas City Chiefs for winning the Super Bowl. If only Garoppolo had made that pass to Emmanuel Sanders, none of this would have happened.
That's a solid point there from you, Monty. And unfortunately, to sort of bring in this last point of the fact is, teams that have a lot of returning veterans, that have a solid coaching staff that is returning, where everybody sort of knows the game plan ahead of time, are going to have a distinct advantage going into the season. And I think the team that returned the most players is your defending Super Bowl champion Chiefs.
Oh, gross.
Yep, I believe 20 of 22 starters. Basically the same squad, plus a draft class.
I mean, I want to try and like say that there could be some sort of Super Bowl hangover, that you guys are just going to take the season lightly. Like, we did it last season, we can do it again. All we need to do is roll out of bed and show up. But quite honestly, if you're not going to be able to practice new schemes, if a coach is trying to teach new schemes, if you've got new players that are trying to learn, to me, you probably could roll out of bed and just win another Super Bowl.
Yeah, it's all going to come down to health, really. I mean, as with kind of every team, kind of as we were talking about before as well, just like, the odds just year to year in terms of pure statistics against, if you're going to say like, who's going to win the Super Bowl this year, the Chiefs or the field is still the better bet. But there's nobody, I think, with a better shot of doing it. It's all just going to come down. But, but that's kind of the thing, too, is, the playoffs are weird. And, the Chiefs, objectively caught a few breaks on their way to the Super Bowl this year, in terms of especially the way that the playoffs shook out. But they also had a lot of bad injury luck in the middle of the regular season, with Mahomes going down, half their O-line, a bunch of the pass catchers. But a lot of those guys were healthy for the playoff run. So, football's crazy. You never know. But I do think the Chiefs are set up to repeat, man. Coming for that legacy.
Maybe Tyreek will get arrested. Let's hold out hope.
Well, I was going to go another way and say, especially if Keanu Reeves gets signed off the street, I mean, that team is going to have just a huge advantage at that point. Let's take a quick recap of my game-by-game predictions by division, and we'll start with the AFC East because, I mean, I did change my prediction for the New England Patriots. I originally had them at 6-10, and I mentioned that Cam Newton gives them an opportunity to win at least 3 more games. I think he's a 3-game difference maker over Jarrett Stidham, which put them at 9-7. And based on my records that I have for every team, 9-7 is a 4-way tie in the AFC, and the Patriots, due to common opponent, will be out of the playoffs at 9-7. Now, I say that, and I look at some of my 50-50 games, and I think the Week 7 home game against the 49ers, which I currently have them losing, is after their bye week in Week 6. And I do think Cam Newton could perhaps give them a better chance to win that particular game. Week 11 at the Texans. I don't know why I'm as high on the Texans as I am, but I still give the Texans the advantage in that game, except now with Cam Newton, I think that game could go in a different direction. And then the Week 15 game at the Dolphins, the Patriots historically never play well at the Dolphins, but maybe with Cam Newton, it's a different trip. And that's 2 or 3 more games, which would put them more in contention for winning the AFC East. And I will tell you, as a Patriots fan, Cam Newton's hype videos is everything I want to hear from the quarterback. But the stuff that I'm seeing about him throwing to wide receivers, his accuracy is so terrible. It is so bad. Like, I'm just it's such a beautiful. I heard rumors that Edelman worked out with Cam, and wait till you see the video. And I watched it, and Cam likes to throw the ball high. Edelman he's like 6 foot, but he doesn't like to catch the ball high. And if you throw a high ball to a slot receiver going across the middle, I hate to tell you, but Julian Edelman's ribs are going to get cracked at least 500 times this season, which is not what I want to see from my older slot receiver.
Yeah, speaking of guys that we're not going to get a chance to see in preseason, and there are going to be a lot of question marks going into the year. When was the last time we saw Cam Newton healthy? And when, is he now? He looks good in, in shorts, prancing around a weight room and airmailing to Edelman on a high school field, I guess. But, do you have a prediction of how many games he starts? And is the assumption that he's going to step right in there?
I think that there's no question that Cam Newton, based on his previous track record, if healthy, is a major upgrade to Jarrett Stidham. There's no way I could say that he isn't. Do I think there's a chance that Jarrett Stidham could compete and push Cam for the job? It would take a lot for me to say that would be the case. I do think that Jarrett knows the system a little bit better than Cam, obviously, because he's been there for a year. To me, a healthy Cam definitely is an improvement upon Jarrett Stidham. So I do think it's Cam Newton's job. And then it's just a matter of how long can he play the whole season? And I think based on the fact that he missed pretty much all of last season, that I do think Cam will stay healthy for the whole season. It's just, I know what Cam Newton's skills are, and they're nothing like what Tom Brady had. And in some ways that's good. Like, Cam Newton's a scrambling quarterback. He can run out of the pocket. He can make plays with his feet. That wasn't Tom Brady. He's a pocket passer. So that's an improvement based on the fact that you have an offensive line that wasn't all that great last season. But Tom Brady's also quick to get rid of the ball, extremely accurate when he throws the ball, and that's not what Cam Newton does well. And that's where I have trouble sort of imagining what the Cam Newton offense is going to look like in New England. And we're not going to see a preseason of it. And I don't know how much of the training camp practices we're going to see. I saw some things that said that the NFL is going to try and allow the owned and operated news staffs. Like, I know the Patriots have their own media staff. We all know this because they got fined for videotaping the Bengals.
And suspended, I believe.
That one particular gentleman got suspended. But I know other teams have their own .coms and their own digital media teams. And so I do think we're going to see a little bit of training camp. I just don't think we're just not going to see a lot of it. And there's not going to be any cross training with other teams. So I don't know. To me, as we talked about, it's a new face, learning new schemes. Yes, Bill Belichick is probably the most prepared, most detail-oriented coach that the league has ever seen. But again, I think that brings you to 9-7. And honestly, the contract they signed Cam Newton to, the reward, the risk-reward factor was huge. I understand why they made the move. It just, to me, if you finish at 9-7, you're making yourself the Steelers. Right? You're just you're going to be a middling team. You're not going to improve. The best way to improve in this league, as we've seen, is you lose a season, you draft a young quarterback in the very early part of the draft, and then you keep that quarterback for 10 or 12 years, and you become a dynasty.
So to paraphrase, if I'm understanding you correctly, the Patriots are not going to make the postseason this year, and we probably have talked about them for way longer than we need to in a postseason.
Yes.
Which is atypical for this podcast to begin with.
We did. I think the AFC East is still the Bills at 11-5, the Dolphins at 5-11, the Jets at 2-12. I think I'm probably a little too low on the Jets, but again, I mean, there aren't a lot of games that I have them losing that I see them winning. Maybe a home game versus the Cardinals. Maybe the away game at the Chargers. Maybe they pull off a home game against one of their division rivals. But yeah, I mean, their schedule is not one that I see a lot of victories on.
Yeah, and also it's never too early to be too low on the Jets, especially with them in the news for the wrong reasons.
Also true. And Jamal Adams is still a Jet, but we'll see for how long he remains that way. The AFC North, I have the Ravens winning the division at 13-3. They'll be the number 2 seed in the AFC playoffs. The Steelers and the Browns will both get wild cards at 9-7. They are 2 of the other 4 teams that I have finishing at 9-7 this season. The Bengals finishing at 2-14. The Steelers and the Browns, their seeding, I actually have the Steelers, even though with the tie with the Browns, they end up with the 6th seed. The Browns will end up with the 7th seed. Remember, there's an extra wild card this season, so the seeding is a little bit different. Only one team will get a bye, and we haven't reached that team yet. But that's how I see the AFC North playing out. Any comments there?
You might be too high on the Browns, and I still think that it's another year or so before their talent gels. I know they were a dysfunctional mess last year. Everyone knows way too much talent on offense to not have at least a 500 record by many evaluations. And, you know, they're bringing all that talent back and adding to it. They added Austin Hooper to the offense as well. David Njoku was supposedly disgruntled by that because the new contract makes Hooper, I think, the top paid tight end in the league. Baker Mayfield still shows no growth. It's like he plateaued at the end of his rookie season and didn't take a step up from that. And the wide receivers are prima donnas. They want the ball or they're going to be, you know, problems to the rest of the squad. Defensively, there's still no discipline. You got guys jumping off sides, bashing opponents in the head with helmets, undisciplined secondary that blows coverage, linebackers who aren't where they're supposed to be. So, yeah, I don't see the Browns making the playoffs, and if they do, they'll be the 7th seed. I mean, I know you have them in a wild card spot tied with Pittsburgh, but I don't think it's that close. The main difference is Pittsburgh is disciplined, and Cleveland isn't.
So it sounds like James is saying he'd like to see that 7 spot go to another team, maybe a team in the AFC West. And it is good to note. It is good to note that Pod is a softie. Remember, make the Browns great again. Let Pod be the GM. He's still got a soft spot for the Cleveland Browns. I like it, Pod. I respect that. Stay true.
Well, listen,
your team's his ex-girlfriend, though. So
to me, the Browns have a roster that underachieved last season. The growth of Baker Mayfield is an issue. They have a new head coach who's going to implement new things for that team. He's a defensive. Wait, is he a defense? No, I think he's an offensive-minded coach. But
no,
in any case,
minded guy. But it's all
in any case,
3 years.
I just, to me, the talent level on that team, they're underachievers, but the Browns are always underachievers. I just think that they can't underachieve worse than they did last season. And if they do, then there's bigger problems. I mean, maybe they can.
The problem was the coach last year. Let's see how they do with a little bit better coach and a little bit better scheme, and we'll see how they do. I think you're about right, Pod. They'll be battling for that 7 spot.
For what it's worth, our Browns fan was musing with wishful thinking in the Slack channel this week about some theories that if the the season is totally just scrapped, that they will go on, the draft order will be basically the average finishing record of every team for the last 4 years, which would give him the first round pick again, and he would want to get Justin Fields and do a 2-quarterback offense. So that's where the minds are at in Browns land right now.
That would be terrible, by the way. That there's no way that could be allowed. The Patriots would end up with like the number 32 pick, and they're not going to be anywhere near that type of value this season. Oh, that's terrible. Anyway, AFC South, I have the Titans winning this division at 12-4. The Colts at 9-7 get that other wild card. The Texans finish at 8-8. The Jaguars finish at 4-12. For seeding purposes, the Titans would be the 3 seed. The Colts would be the 5 seed. And that gives us all of our wild card teams. The 2 seed Ravens would host the 7 seed Browns. The 3 seed Titans would host the 6 seed Steelers, and the 4 seed Bills would host the 5 seed Colts. Which means there's one team that's getting a bye, and that would be the winner of the AFC West. I know that 2020 has felt like a decade, not just 6 months. You may have forgotten Phillip Rivers is terrible, and he lost to the Raiders twice last year, single-handedly, I'll remind you. He threw some terrible ducks that were picked off, and I know that the Colts have a good offensive line, but Phillip Rivers is done. There's no way the Colts are going to do anything with Phillip Rivers. They should turn it back over to Jacoby Brissett and hope for the best. See, I think a lot of the problems with Phillip Rivers was the lack of an offensive line. So now that he has one, I mean, he's got enough weapons. To me, the weapons around Phillip Rivers will make up for the suckiness of Phillip Rivers.
He had weapons last year and the defense. Phillip Rivers was the problem, not the solution.
Absolutely, Monty, and I couldn't agree more. This is not an upgraded quarterback. If anything, it's an older guy playing at the same level as the young guy you already have there. My thing is let Jacoby Brissett grow in this offense, something he's not actually been allowed to do. Colts actually would have made the playoffs last year, which I've ranted on about, if he didn't get hurt and missed 2 games. But this is a situation where they are. I don't think they're as good as you're predicting, Pod, with Phillip Rivers. I think you're giving him too much credit for having Phillip Rivers as a quarterback. I'd probably knock him back a couple of games, 9-7, 10-6 at best. Definitely not the second best team in this division. I still think that's Houston or Tennessee. I just feel that the division will come down to those 2 teams, and maybe the Colts scrap at that last spot. Maybe they don't, but it won't be because of Phillip Rivers.
I also think it's interesting you're high on the Titans here at 12-4. They also had 2 big signings of franchise players this offseason, and both giving Ryan Tannehill something like $46 million guaranteed or something like that, a big contract for the next 3 years. They extended Derrick Henry, which I actually think was a pretty reasonable deal. I mean, to the extent that you should ever pay a running back, because it's basically the cost of 2 tags and then some, funny money that's probably a bargain or something they can renegotiate strapped on top of that. But, I mean, it is very much they want to just sort of try to repeat the magic that they had late last season. And I'm not sure I'm totally buying that is all sustainable, and that was not just a really fun story from late last year. It seems like they're sort of built to win one way, and if they can impose their will and get you on your back foot, you're pretty much finished. But if you're able to go back and forth with them, I mean, they're not built to win in a shootout, and they want to be running in the fourth quarter and doing nothing but throwing play action bombs. And if they can win that way, great. But I'm just call me skeptical that that's going to work 2 years in a row.
So if you look at their schedule and you look at the teams that they're going to face, I have them losing against the Vikings at Minnesota. I do have them beating the Steelers, so that could be a game that you would flip. I do have them beating the Bills. That might be a game that you could flip. I do have them sweeping the Texans for some reason. I think it's mainly because the Texans game is their second Texans game is the last game of the season, which could end up being irrelevant for both teams, honestly, at that particular point. But winning their home game against the Texans in week 6, I think, is totally reasonable. I have them losing at the Ravens, at the Colts, and at the Packers. So, I mean, the other games, Bears at home, Colts at home, Browns at home, at Jaguars, I mean, to me, the Titans are set up with a very winnable schedule. It's probably one of the easiest schedules in the league.
Yeah, but the Titans are one of those teams that play up and down to the competition and sometimes lose games they should win games they should lose. And which is the case last year, pretty much how they went on that run to make the playoffs. I mean, no one thought they were going to beat the Chiefs in the middle of the season before Mahomes' injury, and yet they did. Granted, there was some hijinks of flukiness and busted plays on both sides of the ball for both teams, but you go into that game before it starts, there's no way you believe the Titans are going to beat the Chiefs, and yet they pull it off. And that's the type of quirkiness of this team. They are disciplined. They do play sound defense. It's pretty much the hallmark of them winning games in bunches. And they rely on Henry at running back. The key thing is when teams force Henry out of the game plan and put everything on Tannehill, can he perform? 12 wins, a bit high. Well, yeah, he did last season. But if they can stop Henry, and this is a big if teams can somehow manage to stop Henry with 7 in the box as opposed to 8, because that's how Tannehill was able to perform, was that he was going off play action. But when they put him in 3rd and long and force him to actually play drop back quarterback, where he has to think about what he's looking at on defense, scan the field, make the right read, throw a pass, not very consistent in that department still. And he wasn't consistent last year. Remember, a lot of his production came off play action. Almost 80 to 90% of his passing numbers came off play action. You take that element away from this offense, he's the guy we know from Miami, and more teams are going to try to do that this season.
Sure, but when you say that, and you look at the teams that I have them winning, those teams that could possibly stop Henry with only 7 instead of 8 would be the Steelers, the Bills, the Bears, and that's it. Those are the teams I have them beating. And those are home games. So I just don't – I hear what you're saying, James. To me, based on the roster, based on the matchups, the fact that we're talking about a veteran team that brought back a lot of their starters, and they are rumored to be the number 1 place for Jadeveon Clowney if he decides he wants to play this season. To me, the Titans have everything in place to be one of the elite teams in the AFC.
And that's why I don't trust them, because everything is in place.
Tannehill was playing with house money last year, too. You got to remember, he came in for Mariota. He had nothing to lose. He might have taken some chances that maybe a starting quarterback salary he doesn't want to risk. I don't know. Everything fell into place last year for Tannehill. Will it happen again this year? Maybe. All the points that you made are valid points, but I don't know, man. I think Deshaun Watson's more likely to be in the playoffs than Ryan Tannehill, but we'll see.
But Deshaun Watson's team is just being decimated by their head coach, general manager. I mean, what?
If only we can get
how many times he won that division in a row?
Yeah, well, yeah. They had DeAndre Hopkins. They don't anymore. Now they have a bunch of wide receivers made of plexiglass.
Plexiglass is surprisingly strong.
Yeah. And I was going to say probably apropos for 2020 as well. Let's move now to the AFC West, where I have the Kansas City Chiefs just thoroughly dominating their schedule and finishing with a 14-2 record, losing at the Bucs and at the Saints. But I mean, if you want to talk about a team that I feel most confident in, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lock victories on the Chiefs' schedule this season. Texans, Patriots, Raiders, Jets, Panthers, Broncos, at Dolphins, Falcons, Chargers. I mean, to me, you're not beating the Chiefs this season. We don't even need to pencil them in as the 1 seed here. We can put it in ink.
I'm just offended you didn't lock all of our division games.
Well, listen, division games can go either way. And I know that even though you may have swept this team last season, and even though I do have you sweeping them again this season, the Raiders do give you problems.
Not after
the Chiefs have lost 3 division games in 5 years, 27-3.
All right. Well, it can happen. Just because the AFC West is trying to do their best impersonation of the AFC East for the past couple decades doesn't mean that those rival teams can't win a game here or there. That said, they're not going to this season.
No, the Chiefs will mess up and lose one of these road division games. I don't know which one, but they will slip up and blow one.
The Chargers, if you're giving me too much credit for the Chargers not winning because of Phillip Rivers last season, I took Phillip Rivers away from the Chargers, and now I've got them at 2-14. So
yeah, they're not that bad.
The
offensive line is probably still in shambles. There's still talent out there. I believe that whoever they go with the quarterback is capable of winning more than 2 games, though.
With that defense, definitely.
I've got them starting 0-5, and in those games, sure, I can see them beating the Bengals at the Bengals week 1. I could see them beating the Panthers in week 3, but they're not beating the Chiefs and they're not beating the Bucs and the Saints in that span. So you're still looking at 2-3 to start the season. Then Jets at Dolphins, Jaguars, Raiders. Again, I mean, maybe you beat the Jets. I've got them losing to the Jets. I've got them beating the Dolphins. I'm sorry, I got them winning against the Jets. I got them losing to the Dolphins because it's an away game. I have them losing to the Jaguars because I needed the Jaguars to get a win somewhere. And I have them losing to the Raiders. The Raiders roster is way better than what the Chargers have.
Not debating that, but I mean, again, like you said, division games are hard to predict. But I still think you're too low on them.
Plus, they're playing in a new home. They're featured on Hard Knocks. We know if you're on Hard Knocks, you're not going to be a good team. So, I mean...
Yeah, and they're also second tenant in this new home, too.
Yes, exactly. I have the Broncos finishing at 4-12, and while I gave the Raiders a nice compliment, I'll take it back. I see them at 6-10.
They're out in Vegas, Pod. They're going to catch a lucky streak, roll them bones. They're going to hit some 7s and 11s. They're going to win some games you're not expecting. They're going to be right in the mix.
How long of a leash does Derek Carr have before Marcus Mariota gets thrown in?
I think he has an incredibly long leash with no preseason, no time to learn the system, no time to adapt. I think Derek Carr has got a huge head start on Mariota. When you're talking about 2021, then let's see how it plays out. But this year it should be a no contest.
Up to week 10, I have you winning your home opener, and that's it. So if that happens, do you see Marcus Mariota then?
At 1-9?
Mm-hmm. 1-8.
At 1-9, sure, anything goes. I think by then you've lost your defensive coordinator. Might as well throw in a new quarterback for sure. Get him some reps. At 1-9, anything goes.
By the way, the teams that you're facing in that stretch: at Panthers, Saints, at Patriots, Bills, at Chiefs, Bucks, at Browns. It's a rough bunch of games in there.
So they'll probably be 3-2. We all agree. Let's move on.
The NFC side, in the NFC East, I have the Cowboys just eking out the division victory at 11-5. The Eagles coming in at 10-6, getting a wild card. The Redskins, the Washington team at 6-10, and the Giants at 4-12. The Washington team, we didn't talk much about the things that have happened to the Washington team. One, that they've retired the Redskins logo and nickname. And we'll be looking for a new team name. I am told that the new team name should happen before the season kicks off. And they're actually hoping that it will happen before the preseason. So we'll see about that. The other thing is that apparently their front office just hates women in all people, which is terrible. Actually, it's not that they hate women. It's that they just don't respect women. It's probably a better way to put it.
Yeah, and it's not just that's just the tip of the iceberg. We can do a whole podcast on the crap fest of atrocities that have come out of Washington over the last couple of weeks, months, even this year. But unfortunately, a lot of this isn't new. This is stuff that's been going on for a while. I don't know if any of you remember, 3 to 5 years ago, with a big scandal of the cheerleaders of different franchises facing various types of abuse, from being told you have to do this for this big name ticket holder, or you have to do this for this VIP who was brought in, from taking trips to places and not being given their passports to get back into the country, nude photo shoots, calendar shoots that, trust me, if you knew the details, would make your head spin. And it was like 6 or 7 teams at the front of this probe that went down, and yet Washington, a team that was named at the time for a lot of these things going on, didn't stop doing or didn't do anything to change the practices that was happening to these women, and continued to do so up until the Post article dropped last month. The team name is something that we've bloviated about ad nauseum, year in and year out, something that should have happened eons ago. But again, the bottom line is green until enough people with deep pockets and sponsors and corporate entities decided that enough was enough of the name, that nothing was going to happen. I don't want to hear anything about Snyder's research into Native American and indigenous tribes of this country, and as far as how they were okay with it. That was a crap of a poll that he carries around in his pocket, and still does to this day, to say that, hey, Native Americans love this name. They don't. He's basically, it's a poll of like 5 people who he pays to say that they love the name. I don't also take stock in any Washington fan who says that I am 1/16th Cherokee and I'm okay with the name. That is a blatant, flat out lie, because they're not. They're just saying it to seem somewhat, I don't know,
non-racist,
radiated into the culture. But I mean, that's something that I grew up in, having been born and raised in DC, that a number of people say there's some member of some Native American tribe, 1/16th, 1/32nd, because great granddaddy on someone's side of the family was from one of these indigenous tribes. Not true in all cases. I mean, if they take a test now to pretty much find their genealogy, small percentage that it goes back to any one of these native tribes. But, Snyder is pretty much, I'm not going to say he's at the end of his rope, but plausible deniability is going to save him from having to sell the team at any point in the future, because almost everyone under him who's getting busted for this is leaving his name out, or just saying he had no knowledge of what was going on, which is kind of hard to do as an owner, considering what we saw happen to Jerry Richardson of the Panthers just 2 years ago.
I wonder if a similar story had come out of Washington, if Daniel Snyder would have been put in the same position as Jerry Richardson. But because it just happens to be sexual harassment and not racially motivated, it's not being looked at in the same light, even though both are just as atrocious as the other.
And again, this is the difference, because with Richardson, he was quoted as saying those things, saying and doing those things. Those are things that were on him. In this case with Snyder, there's nothing directly going back to him. It's people under him. So it's people in the GM office, people in the president's office of the team, high-ranking officials. I mean, heck, we even talked about in our Slack channel how Jay Gruden's son had talked to a former player who blew the whistle on Gruden having an affair with a secretary with the Washington franchise. And when that guy blew the whistle, he basically went from playing in some capacity to not playing at all, to being relegated to the bench, and then being off the team within a span of a couple of weeks. So, I mean, improprieties as far as what was going on that team over the last several years is just insane, basically from whoever's right under the owner all the way down to the previous head coach. And it's a culture that needs to change. And some heads probably need to roll. I mean, you basically got minority owners having a fire sale for their shares of the team. Something I was talking to one of my friends about, who is a Washington fan, was wondering if the minority shareholders, if they all got together and sold to the same person, would it be enough to force Snyder out? And it's something that we were just wondering about, and something I don't know off the top of my head. But if that's a thing that's possible to happen, depending on how much ownership, how much of a share of ownership that Snyder has, that is something that could happen if he doesn't. If the minority owners get together and gang up against him, do they have a case to like force him out to sell the team outright so that no one involved currently in ownership has a stake in this team? So that's something to look at as well.
It's pretty sickening, the stories, the published story about the Washington team. And of course, if you've been on the internet, the rumored stories about what else is happening in Washington. And let's not forget Trent Williams' situation with the medical team in Washington, also part of the problem with the whole culture in Washington. Let's hope Ron Rivera can make some significant changes to that culture there. Nothing worse than hearing a father say, my daughter works for the team, I won't stand for this. And then it falls flat. Right. So,
right. This goes back to what we were talking about with the COVID stuff, is that you have some of these organizations in the league, and, most are probably above average in terms of the way they run their shop. But we know that the Washington has been a very poorly run organization for a number of different ways. And we're just going to have to trust them to be doing all the right things with the virus when they were not telling players that they had cancer. They had this really abusive culture internally. And
And the Keanu Reeves joke may not be too much of a joke for much longer, because one of the rumored names for the new Washington team is the DC Sentinels, which was the name of the team Keanu Reeves led in The Replacements, which would be interesting. The NFC North. Remember the North. I have the Vikings just winning this division at 10-6, but the competition in the NFC is going to be tough. So the Packers at 9-7 will miss the playoffs. I have the Bears at 6-10 and the Lions at 5-11, and that will probably spell the end of the line for the rocket scientist in Detroit.
He's playing with house money. He's going to have to go all in. I did see this week that Mike Zimmer got an extension. And as far as a team kind of bringing in a new coach and hoping that'll change the culture and turn into a playoff team, the Vikings kind of struck gold with Zimmer, and they rewarded him with a nice new contract. So I don't know if he'll be able to revamp that defense. I think that was the problem last year. But, they're locked in with Kirk Cousins and Dalvin Cook as their running back. They lost Diggs. It'll be interesting to see. I think it's going to be a tough division, very competitive. We'll see if the Vikings can pull it off. But I think their defense is going to kind of tell the tale of how far they go.
Yeah, hold on there, Monty, with the Dalvin Cook stuff, because he's not reporting to anything until he gets a new contract. And like you said, Zimmer got a new contract. Zimmer is a proponent of playing tough defense and running the ball. He basically wants to do what's happening in Tennessee. Can't do that without Dalvin Cook. And that showed last year. When Dalvin Cook wasn't on, this team struggled because it allowed Kirk Cousins to look like a competent quarterback. Yes, I'm still not going to say anything nice about Kirk Cousins. But until Cook gets a deal done, this offense I have zero faith in, because if you have to put everything on Cousins, yes, the numbers will look pretty, but they won't win.
I think this is sneakily maybe one of the most competitive divisions. I mean, not in a way where these guys are going to be, sending a representative to the Super Bowl necessarily, but kind of like the AFC South has been for a long time, where I think you could see any of these teams potentially winning it and the other three being within a game of 500. Because even the Lions, I am not a Matt Patricia believer, but Matt Stafford was actually looking really good in the first half of the season before he got injured. There was, PFF loved him, said that it was like their best string of quarterback play they've watched in a long time. And, they've been consistently adding pieces there, but, they weren't able to hold it together because they had some guy, Driscoll throwing for them. And at some point, the guy, last name looks like Blow, but I guess Blau. I mean, yeah. Right. I mean, you can't put that on Stafford and some other parts of that team. I could see them actually being competitive this year. Packers, you never know how pissed off Aaron Rodgers is going to be about the changes, but certainly with the potential to contend. And the Bears, I actually think, I mean, they have the pieces there on defense, so that if just Nick Foles being there is enough of a mentor, or at least lights a fire under Trubisky to have him play at least steadily, or having Foles take it over and actually just be able to execute the offense and let the defense keep the game close, they could definitely take the division. It'll be an interesting one, especially in a chaotic year.
I will tell you, playing Madden, that the Bears have a extremely good defense, probably an underrated defense even. But their offense is it's terrible.
And they've already got a full-blown quarterback controversy going into the season. People are done with the big Trubisky. BD Nick is out there. He knows the system. He's ready to take over. I mean, I think that could get worse before it gets better. Even though I think that Nagy's done he's a good coach. He just, the big Trubisky just has not panned out.
This is another team that needs to run the ball as well, much like Minnesota. That's something they got away from last year because, shiny new toy, young quarterback, let's frame the offense around him and show off his skill set and talent. Unfortunately, his 1 year as a college starter didn't show much skill set and talent, and it hasn't blossomed so far in the NFL. So running the ball would help this kid develop.
The NFC South, I have the Saints winning the division at 13-3, the Buccaneers coming in second at 12-4, the Falcons trying ever so hard to finish at 8-8, and the Panthers managing 5 victories, 5-11, with their new college coach and Teddy Two Gloves at the helm. I think I've said this before, even doing our divisional previews, I still think you're too high on the Buccaneers. And again, because of the situation we're in, no OTAs, no preseason, limited workouts with your new teammates. Is Tom Brady an upgrade over Jameis Winston? At this point in time in their careers, debatable. Will he throw less than 30 interceptions? Absolutely. Hold up, James.
I'm not done. Hold on. I'm going to give you a chance.
Upgrade of Tom Brady. The only upgrade that Tom Brady brings, and I will give you this, Tom Brady doesn't bring you a stronger arm. He eliminates 30 interceptions immediately.
Well, he doesn't eliminate all 30, at least 15.
No. Brady will eliminate at least 25 of the 30 interceptions.
No.
Brady doesn't throw interceptions. He doesn't.
I will go on record right now and say Brady throws at least 8 interceptions this season.
I'll take the under. Put it on the board.
So he threw 8 last year, 11 the year before, and 8 the year before that. So just saying.
Still going to take the under based on Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Rob Gronkowski, Cam Brate, O.J. Howard.
Okay, so
whomever it is that got coming out of the backfield.
Here's another question. It's 1st and goal at the 1. And Brady has the jumble formation in, and he's turning around and handing the ball off to whom?
Ronald Jones. Ronald Jones is a sneaky good runner.
No, he's a sneaky good pass catcher out of the backfield. He's not good as a runner. So again, I ask you, it's 1st and goal at the 1. Tom Brady's turning around and handing the ball off to who's getting
Keyshawn
the ball
Vaughn, their rookie, the rookie. He's gonna plow through whatever defender. He's just gonna truck him like he's not even there.
And behind an offensive line that can barely run block. So the question is, whoever's in that backfield, even if they do perform well, does the offensive line get them killed 3 yards in the backfield or at the line of scrimmage?
All right. Well, listen. Well, if it's 1st and goal and they lose 3 yards, then hey, I just mentioned you've got Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Rob Gronkowski, Cam Brate. Why are you running the ball at that point? Like, throw it. Might as well. You're going to throw less than 8 interceptions, so you don't have to worry.
I think Brady just texted that football is fun again to Mike Allstott, so they might bring him back out of the he can't get a yard.
Yeah, bring back Warwick Dunn while you're at it.
Yeah, there you go. It's perfect. It works out fine.
That was the last time the Bucs were fun to watch. So,
I mean, I want to give the Falcons more love, but I mean, I can't. Based just on their schedule, based on their opponents, and based on the fact that you've got the Saints and the Bucs in the same division, it's kind of tough to do. But the Falcons are a team that, I think has the potential to do better than 8-8. It's going to be tough for them.
They do, and I'm gonna make MJ very happy here. I overall, on paper, I think the Falcons are better than the Bucks, not quite better than the Saints. They are returning a lot of pieces. They upgraded at running back by bringing in Gurley to help with that backfield. I don't think he gets the bulk of the carries. I do think he contributes in a major way to keep the offense moving. I still think they have a hole at tight end they need to fix. They could probably run a lot of 11 personnel and leave that tight end in the block a lot of the times. Defensively, they still need to get solid on that side of the ball. And they don't need to be great defensively. They pretty much just need to be average defensively for this team to be successful. They don't have to be stellar and stand out and, be top 5 across the board. If they're just middle tier, say, ranking 15 to 13 in all defensive stat categories, this could be a dangerous team. But offensively, outside of the Saints, I think they're the most stable unit coming back into this division this season because there's very little turnover, there's very little change.
Based on the losses that I have for the Falcons, they're going to have to steal one from the Saints and one from the Bucks because I don't see them winning on the road at the Cowboys, at the Vikings, or at the Chiefs. As a matter of fact, the Chiefs game is a lock win for the Chiefs. So that'll be the difference. The Falcons will have to find a way to steal a game from their division.
And that's not necessarily difficult because their games with the Saints, they tend to split with the Saints year in and year out. The question is, do they win the home games or do they win the road games? Because they've done both.
In the NFC West, I have a tie between the Seahawks and the 49ers at 12-4, but based on their head-to-head, the Seahawks will win the division. The Cardinals I have coming in at 7-9, and the Rams will finish last in this division at 6-10.
Are you sure about that? I mean, I think Sean McVay knows Sean McVay, so he's a great coach. That's good. Yeah, I mean, listen, I think the Rams definitely took a big step backwards last season, although the rest of the league apparently didn't notice because of who knew Sean McVay. But I don't know if they have enough pieces in place to make the adjustments they need to make to be a winning organization again.
To me, I think the team that makes sense to take a step back this year is the 49ers. I see some similarities between them and the Rams in that they were a team with, not a top 10 quarterback, but with enough good pieces and extremely well schemed up and very well coached, but had some of those scheme elements. I don't even know that the Chiefs necessarily exposed them in the Super Bowl, but either way, they didn't win the Super Bowl despite their really good run with what they had. And now with a full year of teams picking apart that scheme, I'm just not sure how reproducible it is. With the Rams, I feel like now that they've gotten to the other end of that whole experience, I have at least a little bit more faith they're going to finish better than they did last year. But it's all on Goff, who's, I think, one of the biggest cap hits in the league this year. And it's a question of whether or not the protection is going to hold up for him, because that's when he really gets into trouble is when he's pressured. Good news is the Seahawks, who are the other team you have winning this, or is tying at the top of this division, have zero pass rush, particularly without Jadeveon Clowney, who they apparently do not want to sign. I have zero idea how they get to the quarterback, and they continue to be, on paper, well coached and very talented, obviously with the quarterback and everything, but one of the more bizarre teams in terms of the way that they run things, so much in base on defense and so much running despite having Russell Wilson.
Based on all the records, the seeding will go the Saints with the number 1 seed, so they'll get the bye. The Seahawks, the number 2 seed, will host the 7-seeded Eagles. The 3-seed Cowboys will host the 6th-seeded 49ers, and the 4-seed Vikings will pull the 5 seed Buccaneers as their opponents in the NFC playoffs. All right. So how will those playoffs play out? Well, let's stay in the NFC. Why don't we? I see the Bucs beating the Vikings and the 49ers beating the Cowboys and the Seahawks taking care of the Eagles. Again, I just think the Bucs are that much better than the Vikings. The Vikings are just fortunate enough to be in the playoffs as a division winner, and the Cowboys and the Seahawks, the Seahawks having the home field advantage over the Eagles. And I'm still a bigger believer in the 49ers than I am of the Cowboys. But I see your logic though, Nick. I can admit to your logic.
And if Clowney's not around on the Seahawks to headhunt Carson Wentz in the playoffs, maybe the Eagles make it to the next round.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate that.
On the AFC side, the 2-seeded Ravens will handle the 7-seeded Browns easily. The 3-seeded Titans, I'll give them the victory at home over the 6-seeded Steelers. And the home team Bills at the 4 seed will beat the 5-seeded Colts. And you guys have already mentioned your dismay of Phillip Rivers. So if the Colts do make the playoffs, then they'll lose the playoffs thanks to Phillip Rivers, according to you.
Well, they'd be losing based on Josh Allen learning from his missteps in the playoffs last year, where the Texans were really doing everything they could to hand the game to the Bills, and Josh Allen just dropping the game right through his hands multiple times. There were like 3 or 4 straight possessions. They could have won that game and advanced. And so, yeah, I mean, everyone is expecting him and that team to take a step forward. If that's the case, then I think they absolutely can pass right by the Phillip Rivers Colts. I mean, Rivers has never necessarily been a great playoff quarterback as well. It's one of those things in his legacy that sort of sticks out as being like, oh yeah, he's a great fantasy, great regular season guy, but has just, tends to just not meet the moment. So I see that there for the Titans Steelers. I think that's going to be an interesting one if Big Ben has anything left in the tank. And yeah, Ravens, I think should be able to walk right on past the Brownies.
So congratulations, Buffalo. You get to go to Kansas City. That will be a blowout victory for the Chiefs. And then the Ravens-Titans should be a good one. I ultimately see the Ravens coming out on top, which will lead to the AFC Championship featuring the Chiefs and the Ravens. And quite honestly, I think that's the real Super Bowl this season.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting. The Chiefs, I think they play in the regular season this year as well. Let's see. That sounds dumb. Oh, yeah, week 3. And they played the last 2 years. And so the Chiefs are currently 2-0 against Lamar Jackson. But both in at least somewhat hard-fought games. I do think they're the 2 best teams in the AFC, so this would be the people's AFC Championship game. I think it's the heavyweight match we're going to be wanting to watch, especially after all those months following whatever happened in that week 3 game.
On the NFC side, I will admit wholeheartedly that I just couldn't pass up on the storylines. But I have the 1-seeded Saints hosting the 49ers and losing in similar fashion to the way they lost the regular season game last season, with a pass to George Kittle blowing through 3 defenders, and then a field goal from Robbie Gould to put the 49ers into the NFC Championship game. And the number 2 Seahawks facing the Tom Brady-led Buccaneers, and Tom Brady in the playoffs. I'll take Tom Brady. If you're going to give me Tom Brady in the playoffs versus the field, I'll take the Tom Brady side. I'm going to take Tom Brady to beat the Seahawks. So the 5-seeded Bucs will host the 6-seeded 49ers in the NFC Championship game. It's Brady versus Garoppolo.
Oh, man.
It would be good for the storylines.
I don't know if you spiked your Kool-Aid with or what type of medication the dentist gave you earlier today, but you need to lay off both.
Well,
Tom Brady is in the most the high risk demographic. He's a senior citizen. I don't know if he's going to make it the whole season to be playing in the playoffs.
Well, I mean, if I want to use your own arguments against you, the Seahawks don't have a pass rush to get to Tom Brady. So Tom Brady's got all day to throw to an enormous package of weapons. Tom Brady's got no problems just carving the Seahawks and throwing, and then, Pete Carroll making the mistake of throwing it on the 1 yard line and the Bucs win. Bucs win.
Yeah, I think the Vikings in the wild card would be the tougher matchup on paper for the Bucs. Although, again, we still haven't seen what the Tampa Bay team is going to look like. But yeah, I mean, the matchup between a Bruce Arians, Tom Brady team versus Shanny and the Niners in the NFC Championship game would be quite a bit of fun. And hey, if they keep Gronk patched together with CBD oil long enough, and he has some more, antics in the playoffs. I mean, that's going to be some viewing pleasure for sure.
I disagree with you there, Nick. I think we have seen the Tampa Bay Brady's. It's basically Tom Brady getting really frustrated and yelling at his teammates on the sidelines when they're not where he expects them to be, as they all try to learn how to play together. So I think there's going to be a few bumps in the road there, and it isn't going to be all avocado ice cream and apple juice.
By the playoffs, they'll have that all taken care of. That's regular season stuff you're talking about.
Under Bill Belichick, yes. I don't know if that's the same story with Bruce Arians. No risk it, no biscuit versus Tom Brady throwing a 2-yard pass to his running back. We'll see.
Also, I forgot to mention that by week 5, Gronk will somehow roam into the Performance Center at WWE headquarters down in Florida and win the 24/7 title again. So he'll be out for the rest of the season after that.
Oh, that's too funny. All right. The Super Bowl will feature the 1 seed from the AFC, the Kansas City Chiefs. They will beat the Baltimore Ravens in a very tough physical game that comes down to the team that has the ball last. And the 5-seeded Tampa Bay Bucs, Tom Brady puts the kid in his place once more and takes his team to yet another Super Bowl. Chiefs Bucs where are they playing it this year? I don't even remember anymore.
I don't think anybody remembers, considering
I think it's in LA.
The state of the world.
Is it in LA this year? I don't even know.
I think so. New stadium and all that, probably. But in reality, it's going to be in a, behind plastic in a hospital, rec yard or something. But
and I see the Chiefs putting Tom Brady back in his place, saying, "Take a seat, old man. It's Patrick Mahomes' turn for a dynasty," and the Chiefs win. As unfortunate as that may sound, Monty.
So, Pod, in this scenario with Brady and Garoppolo, does Brady represent Jake Gyllenhaal or Heath Ledger in this scenario?
That's a good question. I'm not 100% sure. Don't remember the outcome of that particular film that you're referencing, but I will tell you, female version of Jimmy Garoppolo was pretty hot.
I was hoping that would never come up on this podcast, but there you go.
Well, since it's out there, female Patrick Mahomes made me feel feelings. So, you just got to embrace it.
Super Bowl is in Tampa this year, gentlemen. Super Bowl goes to Tampa, then Los Angeles.
No, it doesn't. Is it really? Now the storyline's even better. Tampa hosts the Super Bowl.
6-pod prediction in that the Buccaneers now don't go to the Super Bowl because never in the history of the game has the host city team made the Super Bowl. Matter of fact, the farthest they've gotten is the conference title game, and that was the Vikings a couple of years ago against the Eagles.
And that's really only because they only awarded a cold city the Super Bowl once. If they had awarded it to Foxborough, as they should have, the Super Bowl would have been hosted by the Super Bowl winning team a couple of times.
That was because MetLife was brand spanking new at the time. When was the last time the Patriots got a new stadium? Gillette is how old? 20 years, I think.
Is Gillette 20 years old? Yeah, it's pretty. Yeah, I think it was after. It's 2002. I think it opened.
Yeah. So 18 years.
They christened the new stadium with a Super Bowl banner. Who knew that they'd add 5 more to it? It's, God, I'm never going to see that again. All right, so. Ladies and gentlemen, that's how I see the postseason playing out. And quite honestly, now even understanding that the Super Bowl is in Tampa, there's no way the Buccaneers are in the Super Bowl. But
none.
That's how I see it. That's how I'm going to stick to it for now. Obviously, my predictions will change as we get closer to game days and we actually see some actual play from these teams. How'd we do? Send us your emails, nextfanup@gmail.com. You can tweet us at NFU Podcast. We can have a great conversation on Facebook. It's a great way to have a conversation, as a matter of fact. Facebook.com/NFU Podcast. Remember to tell a friend about us and subscribe or follow wherever you get your podcasts, because quite honestly, I don't know when the next one of these is coming out. At some point it will, I'm sure. But until then, thank you to Nick. Thank you to Monty. Thank you to James. That is our preseason, postseason prediction show. There you have it.
Oh, yeah. That was awesome.